What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? We are live right now on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. We're good. I think we're good. Make sure we're good. Cool. I hope everybody can hear me. I think we're good. Yep, good. Good stuff. What's going on, man? Shout out to all my people who are here early. Awesome black dude. Not really sure how I feel about that. I feel like there can only be one awesome black dude on my stream at one time, but I'm gonna let it slide this time. Robbie Burns. I did not see the RFK ad for the Super Bowl. I actually did not watch the Super Bowl. I'll explain why in a second. William Hayward, what's going on? So we have a great show for you guys today. I have a fantastic guest coming on in about 15 minutes. I want to go ahead and get into this clip that I saw from TYT before I bring on my guest, Aaron Good. So y'all make sure y'all like this stream. Make sure y'all share this stream. I know that most of you all are used to me doing my shout outs, but today we're going to have to cut that part short because I want to go ahead and get this clip started before Aaron comes in. Y'all got to see this. Y'all got to see this stuff, man. I couldn't believe it. Y'all know. If I'm not even doing my shout outs, it's because I saw something that was absolutely audacious. Disgusting. Turn my stomach. Y'all look at this. We're going to talk about it.
So you said a moment ago that the world would be a lot better if it weren't broken into competing alliances, if there was cooperation globally. One of the reasons you don't have that is because the current American administration is dead set against you. Do you think if there were a new administration after Joe Biden that you would be able to reestablish communication with the US government? Or does it not matter who the president is?
Yes, of course. The lack of world peace really has everything to do with America, nothing to do with the guy who invaded a sovereign country. But anyway, Tucker Carlson announced 2 days ago that he would be interviewing Vladimir Putin. And today that interview was finally published. We've pulled some clips and we want to discuss it. Now, before we watch, it is important to give you a little bit of context and a note about this 2.5 hour long interview. Nearly half of it is taken up by a monologue by Vladimir Putin. Tucker Carlson opens the interview by asking Putin why he chose.
No, that isn't it. So first of all, you could tell they didn't watch the interview. You could tell. They literally are they're going off of clips from nothing other than clips and tweets. No, it was about 28 minutes of Putin talking about the history. But I guess 28 minutes is nearly half of 2 hours and 8 minutes of an interview, but whatever.
Was to invade Ukraine in 2022. That's the sovereign country that I referenced earlier, of course. Putin then spends almost an hour describing his version of the history of Russia and Ukraine, going back to the Middle Ages. And Tucker Carlson only interrupts him a handful of times as he's engaging in this monologue. Now, Putin eventually comes to an answer that isn't really new. It's more of what we've heard from Putin before. He talks about NATO expansion. Western nations were not so friendly to Russia, and too many Nazis in Ukraine, allegedly. That he likes to point to those things. Again, things we've heard before. Go ahead, Cenk.
Okay. What the? So y'all just ain't even pretending to be journalists anymore. Y'all not even gonna pretend. Look, you don't have to like Tucker. You don't have to like Tucker. Hell, you don't even have to like Putin, but you're gonna come in and just spew lies for like as if it's supposed to push this anti-Putin Tucker agenda. I don't know what they're trying to do because all you have to do is go actually watch the interview to know Tucker actually he interrupted several times. Matter of fact, he interrupted Putin so much during his initial monologue, which one could argue is part of the reason why it lasted 30 minutes. But he interrupted so much that some people who were watching the interview were literally saying, I wish that Tucker would shut up and let him finish. So that you can get a clear picture of what he's talking about, regardless of whether or not you agree with him. And he's like, he only interrupted, he didn't push back. And yeah, he literally pushed back, actually. I personally was surprised at how much Tucker pushed back. He even once again gave the comparison like, oh, could Hungary invade Poland or something to that extent, like based off of the logic that you're putting forward? And Putin gave his response, but no, Tucker actually pushed back. And Anna's initial comment, oh, because the peace, the world, we're not experiencing peace in the world, has everything to do with the U.S. and nothing to do with. No, it literally, I mean, if you want to be completely honest, Anna, in this particular case, it has everything to do with the U.S. Hell, I can't think of an instance in the last 50 or 60 years where it didn't have everything to do with the U.S. The U.S. may use a proxy to get the job done, but 90% of the time, 95% of the time, actually, it's because of the U.S. I mean, who overthrew the government in 2014? Who helped overthrow the government with the Maidan coup in 2014? Victoria Nuland. Does she work for Zimbabwe? Out of curiosity? Does she work for Paraguay? Australia, perhaps? Mozambique? Nah, Victoria Nuland passing out cookies on behalf of the United States. Yeah, even this war, Anna Kasparian, is because of the United States and their unwillingness to engage in diplomacy and their hypervigilance in trying to force Ukraine into a situation where they're trying to get admitted into NATO in violation of the Minsk agreement. Oh, and the fact that the U.S. kept supplying Ukrainian bombs to kill ethnic Russians because they didn't want to be part of a neo-Nazi regime. So there's that part. So yeah, actually it had a lot to do with the United States. I mean, if it didn't, why does Zelensky keep running to the U.S. for aid? Out of curiosity, if it has nothing to do with us. Interesting. Oh, allegedly. Also, Ukraine only allegedly has neo-Nazis. All those Nazi symbols that you saw, or that letter that the U.S. wrote as to why they are not going to send aid to Ukraine specifically because of the neo-Nazis, that letter never existed. That's just made up Tucker Carlson propaganda.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It was not long after the...
So you...
22, that's the sovereign country that I referenced earlier, of course. Putin then nations were not so friendly.
But is he going to be tough on Putin? Really? Does anybody think that he was going to be tough on Putin? But I think you have your answer when you don't interrupt someone for over an hour as they're giving you propaganda. I mean, even if you don't think it's propaganda, you might want to ask a follow-up question. You might want to interject. You might.
So Cenk just came to work. He had all weekend, y'all. Cenk had all weekend. He had all weekend to watch at least the first 30 minutes of the interview, so that's what you're going to focus on. He had all weekend, y'all. This motherfucker came to work. He came to class, didn't do no homework. He came to class, didn't do no homework. Y'all, for those of you who were kind enough to watch the interview with me, or those of you who watched the interview after on another platform or after the fact, ladies and gentlemen, did Tucker go the entire interview? The entire first 30 minutes or the first hour of that didn't happen because it was only a 30-minute section of him talking about history. But let's just say for Cenk's sake, an hour of history that was being given by Putin. Tucker went that entire time and I disrupted him, y'all. There is somebody who is watching this show right now, watching this clip right now, and looking at Cenk and Anna as some sort of authority on an issue or an interview that they literally did not watch. I've watched 2 seconds of this, and I know they didn't watch it. He just said that shit with a straight face, y'all. He said he didn't interrupt at all. Oh my God. Let's continue. Holy shit.
Want to challenge something he said within that hour.
Challenge something he said within that hour. If only he did that, like the 15 times that he actually did that, but okay.
If he didn't challenge him for an entire hour, what you thought everything he said there was so true, you didn't have to clarify with the audience that perhaps it wasn't.
Holy shit. Guys, I just can't. I just can't. He literally tried to, he clarified so much, once again, that people were irritated that Tucker kept interfering and interrupting. Nigga did no homework.
And so, and then you saw in that small clip that we showed you.
You didn't watch the interview.
You know, the American government seems so dead set against you. Is that the real problem? Like, we're biased against him. Well, our bias might come from the fact that he invaded Ukraine, but look, we've got our own problems, and I'm perfectly happy to discuss them. In fact, we discussed them for 20 straight years here on TYT, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But sit next to a guy who's trying to be an imperial, recreate an imperial empire that has invaded several countries next to him and has started this disastrous war, trying to make him out to be the peacemaker. Wouldn't you love to align with America? Well, don't you want a one world together?
Holy shit. Y'all, out of curiosity, when did Putin invade multiple countries around Russia and Eastern Europe? I don't remember that at all. Did I miss that part of the movie? Did he just go? First of all, he started out by saying, do we have bias against him? Yeah, because he invaded a foreign nation. Really, your bias wasn't apparent whenever you pushed the Russiagate lie, accepted it as being true because Hillary told you to. And then you were embarrassed because it was false. It got proven wrong, even by those you believed were going to deliver the goods on Russiagate. Your anti-Russia bullshit has been apparent since I've started doing my show, and that is not hyperbole, since 2016, people. You have a bias against Putin because the deep state, and like I've always felt that Cenk works for the CIA. I feel like TYT as a show was actually propped up by the intelligence community, which is why he was able to leave the mainstream and MSNBC. And then all of a sudden he gets rewarded by the same mainstream establishment by getting rounds and rounds of millions of dollars of funding to start TYT on YouTube, which is also owned by Alphabet, which owns Google, which is also a CIA op. Like, of course you're anti-Putin, bro. Not only are you anti-Putin, but you're an idiot. You can't even make a good argument as to why you're anti-Putin. You didn't even watch the fucking interview. Like, I can't really say that enough. Like, he's like, yeah, Cenk invaded, or not Cenk, excuse me, Putin invaded a bunch of countries. That's why. He's not a peacemaker. Yeah, he literally put together the Minsk agreement. And then, despite the constant attempts to violate the Minsk agreement, he still didn't blow Kiev off the face of the planet, despite having every single reason to do so. Even now, he's still being more patient than most countries would. Jesus Christ, bro. Whose man's is this, B?
It's Biden that's stopping you right now. If we had a different president, maybe named Donald Trump, then we could have world peace, couldn't we? This seems like such a great piece of journalism. Come on, this is a joke.
Now, obviously, just based on what we saw in that first clip, Tucker Carlson is trying to make a point about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden and other American, political leadership that's been less friendly, at least rhetorically, toward Vladimir Putin. So
at least rhetorically, you know what? I don't think anyone here I mean, yeah, it'd be nice to be more friendly rhetorically towards a superpower that has nuclear weapons that could blow us off the face of the planet. But you know why she said at least rhetorically? Because pragmatically, Trump put sanctions and signed off on sanctions against Russia. They keep pushing this lie as if Russia was like that Cenk and Russia were just like butt buddies. Like Trump didn't push sanctions. That he didn't sign off on sanctions against the advice of many peacekeepers and anti-war people who were saying, bro, you need to chill out. You do know they got nukes and they didn't do anything wrong, and you're putting sanctions on a country that you don't have any proof interfere in our elections like they're claiming. So that's why she had to say rhetorically. Like, rhetorically is more important than pragmatically. And Tucker did not mention Trump in that particular case. His point was, once again, if she watched the interview, she would know this. His point was, if Biden or Trump or Bush or Clinton or Reagan or whoever Doesn't matter who's running the country. You could fucking replace whatever name with whoever else's name. Putin's point and Tucker's point is it don't fucking matter because they don't run the country. That was the point. I'm gonna bring in my guest Aaron Good real quick. I want to see if you got any comments about this. Aaron.
Hey, how you doing? Can you hear me okay?
I'm doing fantastic, bro. What's going on, man? So really quick, I want to introduce my guest for today. He is what I would consider to be one of the foremost experts on all things JFK. If he don't know it, he's talked to somebody who does know about it. I mean, the guy is really a wealth of knowledge, not only on JFK and all the conspiracy, quote unquote, surrounding that situation, but really on foreign policy in the United States, involvement in foreign policy around the world in general. Everybody, welcome to the show. The host of the Devil's Chess Club, or co-host of the Devil's Chess Club, Aaron Good. What's going on, man?
Hey, thanks. Great to be here, and thanks for the introduction. I heard you talking about, as I was in the lobby there for a minute, the Young Turks, Anna Kasparian, saying something about the Putin interview, I take it?
Yeah, man. So they said that Tucker was actually soft on Putin, and that they let him talk for an hour about history. Yeah, that didn't happen because he didn't talk for an hour about it. But he said he talked for an hour about history, and that Tucker never interrupted him one time.
Right. So she didn't like that historical narrative. I mean, his historical narrative was it was interesting. I think his bigger point was that Ukraine was kind of Ukraine's borders have been kind of the product of artificial, creation from great power politics and so on. So I don't know why she's fixated on that element of it. But
well, I mean, honestly, her and Cenk both said the same thing. I was more confused about the fact that they said that he talked for an hour uninterrupted. When actually, we talked about this on your show. There was complaints saying that Tucker had actually interrupted him too much.
Yeah. So yeah, some people said that. Yeah, it was. I mean, there was plenty of reason to let the guy say what he wanted to say about the historical part of it. I mean, I think in a way he went on a little long about that. I don't know that it was exactly necessary, but
about 28 minutes, yeah.
But settle that aside, it is interesting history that we actually know nothing about, and our concept of national borders and these issues are much different than the Russians. The Russians trace the beginning of their people, their nation, to Kiev. I mean, the Kiev Rus. That's like, so it's a much more complicated thing, and this goes back, centuries and centuries. This is things that Americans just don't really grasp, and yet we're meddling in these things.
Yeah, and I would say we don't grasp them because our country goes out of the way. We learn a lot about quote unquote European history, but it's really Western European history. They don't really tell you that part when you're actually in the class when you're 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th grade. But and we learn a lot about a version of American history, but very rarely do we learn about the intricacies of Russian history, despite the fact that it has so many implications on contemporary international relations. You are actually one of the ones who frequently discusses JFK's relationship with Khrushchev and Russia, really from that time that JFK and Khrushchev had that relationship up until this point, the ebbs and flows of their relationship with the United States. And I bring that up because Tucker alluded to a brilliant point, and really Putin alluded to the brilliant point while he was having this interview, that the U.S. doesn't actually have a president that runs the country. We don't have a leader. We have leaders, and there's somebody's face that is elected every 4 years, but there isn't really any guarantee that if Putin talks to Bill Clinton, Putin talks to Bush, Biden, or Obama, for example, that whatever that conversation they have, that's what he could expect because they aren't really running the country. Do you think that that's something that's started really with the death of JFK?
I think that even JFK himself had to accommodate other forces that are not really described in the Constitution, like forces of oligarchy in the United States. As a capitalist country, it has a capitalist oligarchy. That's just the nature of the U.S. It's always been that way. And the most progressive president that the U.S. had on a superficial, but actually substantial level too, Franklin Roosevelt, he wrote a letter to Colonel House where he said, "You and I both know that financial oligarchy in the larger centers has run this country since the days of Andrew Jackson. So if even a guy like him, who is there as the like champion of U.S. democracy and the most, lowercase d democratic president that we had, even if he's saying this has always been oligarchy in the U.S., these forces have always been in charge.
The same Colonel House that was involved in starting World War I.
Yeah, the guy that was an advisor to Woodrow Wilson, and then he was friendly to, he's an establishment guy. So it's like one establishment guy, Roosevelt, talking to another guy about the establishment. I mean, it's a really interesting anecdote that they would have said that. But so people like JFK, he had to try to accommodate these forces, and he did in different ways. He didn't fire people right away like Dulles and Hoover. He tried to accommodate them and deal with them in different ways and handle things as best he could. But he did want to make some more serious changes to U.S. foreign policy, especially, and I think that was what they would not accept. So JFK was a president who tried to exercise some real initiative on the basis of a vision of what the U.S. should be as a democratic country, and also as a place that would not be likely to spark World War III nuclear style, because that was a real fear of his. So he had these things he wanted to do, and he saw that winding down the Cold War was a way to do that. And so they killed him for that. And that is a powerful lesson for us, because if we understand it, then we understand that we don't really live in a fully democratic regime where the elections matter. If the oligarchy has a veto power up to and including killing the president, then that's a different kind of system. And it's the evidence now for this is so overwhelming. I mean, a lot of people just saw the big podcast that Soledad O'Brien and Rob Reiner did, or they listened to it. I mean, there's a Paramount, on the Paramount channel, they have a Parkland Doctors documentary that really blows the case away. There's Oliver Stone's original JFK, and there's Oliver's JFK Revisited. Both of those are really good. And it's overwhelming. It's clear what happened, that the president was removed by his own regime, essentially.
And to bring it back to Trump, right? And the fact that the presidents don't really run the show. Didn't Trump promise to release all the JFK files, Aaron? I'm pretty sure you remember that, right? What happened?
No, he not only said he was going to, I don't think that was purely just a random thing. My friend Peter Dale Scott, he's a friend and mentor. He's really a brilliant academic and a poet. He said that some people approached him from the Trump campaign, or they said to be somehow connected to people around Trump around 2015 or so. And they were trying to get people together to see about doing this, making this a part of his presidency, like releasing JFK material. And somehow the effort fell apart. But this was, I think he had some instincts in that way. But with Trump, it just seems, if he ever has a good idea or wants to do something good, they find ways to tell him that, oh, no, you can't actually do that. And they make him do what they want him to do.
Yeah. So during the interview, Putin actually said that he had talked to, I want to say Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Let me say one more before you ask this. Let me say one more thing about Putin, because you'll appreciate this. There's actually in the Putin interviews, I believe it's maybe with Oliver Stone, or I think it may be an interview that he did with Megyn Kelly, but he basically says, what about your own country? I mean, who killed JFK? Seems like it was the security service, wasn't it? I mean, Putin himself said this about JFK specifically. So he wasn't just saying that to Tucker, that the spooks are in charge and everything. He said this in the past. It's mentioning JFK specifically.
Yeah. He actually also talked about the fact that, like, when I can't remember what journalist it was, but it was a CNN journalist said that he was responsible for killing some of his political adversaries, and he was like, "We never did anything like that." But speaking of political persecution, don't you have a bunch of people arrested just for walking into a building? 25 years of life. And he's like, and y'all want to talk about political persecution here? We don't have anything like that happening. And I mean, they didn't really have an answer. But the truth of the matter is, Putin is right. It doesn't matter. I've always felt like it doesn't matter if those people are conservative, Democrat, whatever they may be, outside of the obvious fact that some of it was clearly a psyop. I mean, when you have the FBI who knows about it in advance, Capitol Police know about it in advance, no one does anything about it, and police are literally escorting people in. Clearly, part of it was a psyop. But then there was the other fact that there were people legitimately protesting there. And the fact that you can be executed, right, like in the way that Ashley Babbitt was, and then the guy gets off. And she was no clear present threat. You got protesters that were actually, and I think to some degree, I think there's still some that are being held without bond. Like, that's illegal, undemocratic, and unlawful. And yet they want to keep pointing the finger at Putin. And this is really all in retaliation, not of the protesters, but more so retaliation of Trump, just for even trying to have a single iota of control over a government that I feel like the deep state is making it clear we're not gonna let anybody control this shit but us. So Putin made he's very good at calling out the hypocrisy of the US. And what I've also noticed is that they're just very bad at with their rebuttals. They accuse him of something and he's like, that's kind of just hearsay, but yeah, here's all the news headlines of all the things that y'all do that is the exact thing that you're accusing me of doing. So really quick, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about RFK Jr. I want to show a little bit of this clip from this interview that he did with, I want to say, was it David Smith? I think it was David Smith. Let me see. Where he is confusing. RFK Jr. is confusing. We're going to get into why he's so damn confusing on this particular issue in a second. But I wanted to show the audience this clip because it's, quite frankly, embarrassing for somebody who is calling themselves a peace candidate and somebody who is also saying that they're going to be one of those who is challenging the system. Pull it up. Yeah, it's Dave Smith. It's Dave Smith.
What does Hamas want? Hamas has said what it wants is, the end of Israel.
Well, I mean, at different times they've said that. At certain points, they've also said that they would accept 1967 borders. So it would have been great if Israel had taken them up on that when they said it.
Well, let me just
Israel
ask you, take them
let
up
me
on
ask you
that
this.
in like 2008 and 2001, and they refused.
Do you have, I don't agree with that, but okay. Do you have concerns about the level of Israeli influence in our politics here in the United States of America?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a politician in political office, so I don't see much of that.
Aaron, how can he not know that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best thing about that is the 7 or whatever, however many seconds where he's just sitting there. It's silent, I think that's actually the best answer that he gave. I think in a way that tells us, a lot. Actually, I think you can say that about the whole thing in general that we've seen lately.
7 seconds of silence is very emblematic of what we've seen. So issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, this has caused me no small consternation, man, over a long time now. The issue is that what the U.S. desperately needs at this moment in time, and what the world needs from the U.S., which we don't have, which is really the only thing that we need above all else, and that is some level of statesmanship at this crucial time in world history that the U.S. empire is going to have to manage its dissolution, basically. That it's going to have to manage a transition to a world order in which the U.S. and white Europeans are no longer just telling the whole world how it is. And we need this so desperately, and there are only 3 options for this. And we know that there's nothing from the Democratic or Republican side. And RFK's candidacy has been hovering around. He's in like the low 20% sometimes. It seems like he's sort of he's been stuck there. He hasn't fallen, but he's stuck there.
I wonder why.
Well, okay, right, which is, I mean, in my opinion, the Israel issue is what he's going to have to confront if he wants to actually rise in the polls. However, I think another aspect of this is that we are processing what we have seen since October began, since the aftermath of October 7th. And what it tells me is that it's put really the influence of Zionism in the United States and U.S. politics into high relief, that they can get away with this because they have so much power in the United States. They have nobody standing against them. You have 3 people running for president, and none of them is saying ceasefire, which the majority of the U.S. public wants, and a huge majority of the world wants. I mean, an overwhelming majority. And the most, really, if you want to talk about racism that's just sort of internalized, I can't think of anything more racist than Americans, especially white people and Zionists, thinking that the whole world, outside of the white people, are like they're all wrong and immoral because they don't understand that this, slaughter is acceptable in some way. I mean, that to say that the whole world is wrong and that this tiny, powerful minority is correct, which is, the U.S. empire and Israel. I mean, that in and of itself is like a white supremacist mindset, whether you think it is or not. I mean, whether you even want to acknowledge that's what we're talking about. This they don't understand. They're all wrong, and we're somehow.
You can make a genuine argument that we're in a global apartheid. You can make a genuine argument for that because
in many ways that's been the way of it. I mean, look at how prosperous the suburbs are in the United States, for example. Although it's getting worse, but
can you? I mean, for example, what's happening in Congo right now? If they were able to get past this somehow, which it's not going to happen, unfortunately, not anytime soon. But if they were able to have a democratically elected leader, right, who decided they want to reinvest those resources within the country, only trade within African countries that they ally with, what would happen?
Well, I mean, we know what happened to Patrice Lumumba. That's the famous picture of JFK when he finds out about how that Patrice Lumumba was assassinated, and Kennedy gets the message on the phone, and he's like, "Oh my God, this is so terrible," because he actually supported Lumumba and wanted to support African nationalism, whereas Eisenhower, his predecessor, had greenlit the assassination of Lumumba. So they had a leader like that, and they killed him. So we don't have to guess we don't have to ask what we would do. We know what we did, and we know what they did to Gaddafi, who was after similar things. And Lumumba wasn't saying
what they're trying to do to us right now.
Yeah, and Lumumba wasn't saying that he would not trade with the United States at all. He was saying that he just wanted the resources to be used for the benefit of the Congolese people. So that this would be a way to develop the country. They would trade whatever they have that's valuable. They could mine it and trade it with the world and develop their country. That's to make sense from anybody's perspective, but we wouldn't tolerate that. And that's what the U.S. empire has been built around. And the only president since the Cold War began that challenged this seriously was Kennedy. And if you listen to JFK and then RFK tried to pick up the mantle, and they killed him before he could be elected. But Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s policies he very much echoes and endorses what his uncle did as president. He doesn't touch the Israel thing, and we can speculate as to why.
And that's now. And by the way, he's also in the past. He doesn't touch the Israel thing, but also he's in the past has actually been supportive of Palestine. That's what really threw me the fuck off. Whenever he came out seriously against, or at least apathetically in favor of the genocide happening and constantly trying to justify it. It was like the antithesis of what I had seen from him in the recent past.
Yeah. Well, it is quite a thing. I don't believe he believes this. I think that's why you see the 7 seconds of silence. I think he's just. I think he knows that this isn't correct. However, what I'm trying to get at is his uncle and father. He admires them a lot and wants to do wants to succeed where they were not able to succeed. Right? They didn't succeed not because they wanted to do the wrong things, but because they misjudged what the regime would actually tolerate and what they could get away with, what they could do. They made mistakes in terms of thinking that this was a democratic country, and ultimately, I think they didn't understand the really dark force at the top of this whole system, and so they couldn't accommodate that.
Or do you mean like they didn't understand, or in JFK's case, they didn't understand until it was too late, basically? It was JFK who gave that speech about.
He did not know that. I did not know the extent to which he was surrounded by enemies. I think that his Secret Service, the Treasury Director, was a guy named Dylan, and that's who controls the Secret Service. And that is a guy whose family is Dylan, the family of Dylan. They are part of Dylan Reed investment banking house on Wall Street. Some of the people who actually were behind the creation of the CIA in the first place. So these are very super establishment people, and I think they would have he would have been someone that would have been part of the consensus that Kennedy had to go. So this is his Joint Chiefs of Staff guy was probably Max Taylor. I think also was against him as well. He was just surrounded by enemies, and the power of the empire was just too powerful, and he thought you could wind down the Cold War and that this would be acceptable. But they needed the Cold War to run the world. It gave them the excuse to overthrow governments and steal whatever resources around the world. That's what the Cold War meant. So he misjudged what you could actually do. Perhaps what I'm trying to get at here is perhaps Bobby thinks that Israel is essentially unassailable, like that it has become this element in the establishment that if he were to confront them at this moment, it would be not that he would be risking assassination, but that he would be virtually guaranteeing it, given that he has no Secret Service protection. And so that's
it might be better to not have Secret Service protection, though. It might protection. It might be better to not have Secret Service protection, given what we know, you know. But
it's hard to say.
So the point that you made about the fact that Bobby he definitely knows about the Mossad's potential involvement in his family's murder, or
at least some sort of connection between the intelligence services. I don't think he thinks that. I don't think he necessarily. He doesn't believe that
100%.
They were responsible for either of the assassinations. But I think that he would understand that Mossad is connected to the international milieu of the U.S. empire and the intelligence apparatus.
But if he understands these wars as much as he says he does, just in general, he also probably knows the connection between the U.S. intelligence and Mossad. Because for one, it's not like the U.S. and the Mossad are shy about working together. So there's that part about it too. But then there's this. We're going to watch a little bit more of this clip, but I want to say it's just it's so disingenuous for you to sit there, you pause for 7 seconds, and then you say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm not a politician.
Came up with anything. There's a lot of countries that a lot of foreign nations are trying to exert some type of influence over U.S. foreign policy for their interests. That's a regular part of international relations. He could have said anything like that. But instead, he goes, I don't know. I'm running for president, but I don't know who the hell's trying to influence my country. What?
You might not. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, geez.
Let's check out a little bit more of this clip.
Well, I got to ask you so many questions.
So after 9/11.
Listen, I think everybody has, that there's so many malevolent influences on Capitol Hill. And they include many nations, and they include many, corporate entities. And I want to have a real democracy in our country where you get money out of politics and the influence out of politics. That's what I would like, and have publicly funded elections. I don't think anybody, but do I think the Israelis have more influence than others? David, I believe in supporting Israel, that it's important for the United States. And you and I can disagree on that. I believe our aid.
Really quick before he says that part, which technically I guess that part is true, but
he didn't say no.
For us to believe this, we would all have to just completely forget that Dennis Kucinich. Like, for us to believe that he feels this way and thinks like this, we would have to completely forget that Dennis Kucinich was his campaign manager, Aaron.
I mean, look, I'm pretty sure he doesn't feel this way, and I can't really elaborate on it, but he's saying what for some reason.
But just the general population, though. Yeah. Like, everybody who supported him would have to basically forget that he had one of the staunchest pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist campaign managers you could possibly have.
But he left. I mean, he did leave. He hasn't really explained that. People think that it was basically Amaryllis,
but he's gonna sit here and say that he doesn't know, and he doesn't believe that they have that they don't have more influence than the average entity or corporation or foreign
He
entity.
didn't really say that. I don't think he did. He didn't exactly. But the fact that you're paraphrasing it that way conveys how muddled what he was saying was. I think that
That's
he
what I
said.
felt he was saying. Well, how do you feel?
I think he just sort of turned it into a generic kind of like, man, there's so many entities out there that have a lot of influence, and I just would like to get to the point that we don't have as money dominating politics. And that's how I would like to run my administration. He just seemed to dodge. He dodged.
Then he said, hold on.
David, I believe in supporting Israel, that it's important for the United States. Oh, I don't think anybody, but do I think the Israelis have more influence than others? David, I believe.
See, he doesn't answer. That's what I'm saying. He doesn't answer. He doesn't answer.
He really did not.
Look, I mean, look, he tells us.
He leading into the answer, but he was just like.
If you stop and think about it, he is telling us something here in his own way, which is that he can't. He doesn't feel he can.
It's so bad.
He's just stammering.
He's dropping them. I'm gonna be a little honest with you guys, right? So I have a bias towards, or I've had a bias towards RFK Jr. for a very specific reason. And this is one of the reasons why his stance on Israel and Palestine pisses me the fuck off. Because I lost my grandfather to the vaccine, to the Moderna vaccine specifically. And at a time where people were being censored, people were being crushed, people were losing jobs, homes, literally losing family members if you were on the wrong side of history. Like, JFK was brave enough to stand up on the establishment, RFK Jr., my apologies, was brave enough to stand up and challenge the establishment, and not only in ways that people know about, because there's a lot of ways that we know about, but there are other ways that you guys don't know about. I watched him give people jobs that lost their jobs so that they continue to put food on the table, right? I saw him fighting behind the scenes or helping other people fight behind the scenes in courts that otherwise wouldn't have had any help. And doing that in and of itself was very dangerous. And so to see him take such a bold stance during the pandemic and then turn around and fumble the ball, the most straightforward, clear-cut issue in possibly the history of foreign policy issues is the most frustrating shit I have probably ever experienced, because he can get so much, like, getting something wrong, getting something right every now and then. Like, I get that, like, that happens. But it's just one of these things where you're watching him deliberately get it wrong, and it's blatantly obvious to everybody.
Yeah, it's remarkable the power of Israel in the United States. I basically believed in the thesis of Walton Mearsheimer about the Israel lobby, that they exercised an inordinate influence in the United States, and that their influence was used to move U.S. foreign policy in a counterproductive and non-realist direction. That they were basically doing dumb things aggressively in an imperialist way because of the influence of the Israel lobby. I believed that. I now think that it's even crazier than that. I think that they steered, they really steered a lot of U.S. foreign policy in the 21st century. The whole Project for a New American Century it seems to have been dovetailed with those Zionists in Israel itself, like people like Netanyahu, who worked with people like Richard Pearl to draft reports on how the peace process needed to be abandoned, basically, and they just needed to make sure that the region was made safe using American power for Israel, and they called for the Iraq War, and this was in the 90s. And that's the time that people that were egged on by Netanyahu himself, they assassinated Yitzhak Rabin, who was somebody who was amenable to a two-state solution, and that marked the end of that whole time period. And that really was so they're more powerful, and they've steered U.S. foreign policy. I think the Syrian war is a big part of that. Even Ukraine itself, the urgency of kneecapping Russia had to do with Russia supporting the Syrian government. So why do we still have troops in Iraq? Why do we still have troops in Syria? It seems like, why do we insist on attacking Iraq in the first place? Only Israel and Zionism makes sense to kind of explain what would tip the scales into doing something so dumb. And once you see that you can't criticize
recently,
them,
I think somebody came out recently and confirmed that it was because of Israel that we invaded Iraq. It was a senator.
There's been plenty of things to that effect. I mean, some of the people that were involved in the clean break document that worked for Israel were working for the government on that, like people like Douglas Feith at the time. So
that's crazy.
It's a lot of it, and they're so powerful that is something that we're confronted with, and I think it may have to play itself out in some other way because they dominate American institutions. Something has to happen with the balance of power in the rest of the world that Israel is forced to find some other way of doing this, and I think that may be approaching, but the question is, would Israel compromise and allow a Palestinian state, or would they start a nuclear war? Because those two things seem to be one or the other at this point. I don't see how they can go on the way that they have and not have it explode in a worse way.
Yeah. So RFK Jr. likes to invoke his uncle and his father's name pretty often when it comes to foreign policy in his thought process in regarding foreign policy, especially when it comes to, for example, JFK's relationship with Kruschev and how he was willing to work with the quote unquote adversary, and as long as it was going to further the potential of peace. How would you compare how RFK Jr. is handling the situation with Israel and Gaza, or at least talking about it, compared to the way JFK handled the situation with Israel and Gaza? Because actually that isn't really something that gets brought up and just doesn't get talked about. The mob ties get talked about, but Israel was such they were so involved with U.S. politics in the 60s and the 70s in ways that people don't really focus on, probably on purpose. So how would you codify JFK's relationship with Israel and Gaza, or Israel and Palestine?
No, JFK was the last president to really stand up seriously to Israel. George H.W. Bush also tried to influence them to persuade them to create, or coerce them basically to create a two-state solution by saying he'd withhold loans if they didn't go to these negotiations. And that almost worked. But then ultimately, because it started that process, but it didn't, and I think it probably contributed to HW's electoral defeat. I think people like George W. Bush learned from that. So that's an important thing to think of. But JFK himself was the most aggressive in terms of confronting Israel. He was dead set against them being able to get nuclear weapons. And Johnson completely reverses that policy. Johnson also allows them to launch the 1967 war right afterwards, which JFK never would have supported. Even lets them attack a U.S. vessel, the USS Liberty, and blow it up, and they ignore it. So there's a huge change between JFK and LBJ, and I think it's because people have tried to attribute this to like, oh, LBJ was a Southern Christian guy. I don't believe that at all. He was a very greedy, oily fellow, and his connections to the Texas oilmen and military-industrial complex, those people were close to Zionists as well. They were big Israel supporters in Congress at this time. Like people like Donald Rumsfeld were in the 60s back then as a young congressman. He was inquiring about
question. Hold on, I don't want to interrupt.
Zionism.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but when did RFK get assassinated? Or not RFK, JFK. When did he get assassinated?
63.
And then the 1967 war happened, and 4 years later?
Yep.
Because of LBJ who took over?
And in 1968, you had a Palestinian patsy used to kill RFK. So something happens with the death of JFK, and I think that the connection to the assassination, there may be an Israeli connection to it, but I don't believe that it's, having studied a lot and spoken to many people who are authoritative on this, I don't think that they were involved in the assassination. They may have been responsible for Ruby killing Oswald. And in that way, they would have been able to gain a lot of power in the U.S. deep state, as it were, because that would have been helping them at a real difficult time.
Yeah, you gotta clean. You don't want to leave any evidence behind, and taking out Oswald would make sure. I mean, that podcast that you did with Jesse Ventura and all those guys, really talking about how even Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't think is it his wife that Ventura was talking about? It's still like
his widow.
His widow, yeah. How she's even still a little bit like, I ain't really trying to talk about this shit. Like she'll talk about it, but even still, because of just how conspiratorial and scary the situation was, and how it's really never been resolved. And if you're watching that shit play out from her perspective and seeing how there's literally zero accountability in that regard, why would you feel comfortable speaking out? And in my opinion, that just goes back to just how corrupt our country is and our system is, but more so it shows you how there is not really a willingness to engage the corruption, not in a serious way. And everybody, like you say, who has tried to engage it, unfortunately, they end up 10 feet under. But you almost kind of if you're going to run for president. So here's my issue too. So if you're RFK Jr., if you're going to run for president, bro, you know this is coming. You knew this was coming. And if you had no intention on challenging Israel, right? Because maybe he didn't have an intention on challenging Israel. And but the problem is, if you're going to be president of the United States, if you don't challenge Israel, you're not going to solve any of the problems. Any of the
that's just it. Israel and the crazy version of greater Israel that they have in their mind, which is now a religious eschatological thing. It's completely insane. It requires U.S. global dominance. And that is that makes it totally inconsistent with the rest of Kennedy's platform. That's where he should understand. And of course he would know this if you would talk to him about this. I'm sure anyone who would speak to him seriously about foreign policy matters, he cannot not know this, but he's not saying anything about it. So is he? I don't think it's that he's disingenuous about all of this. I just think it's that what he ultimately thinks is perhaps he must support Israel to the extent possible. I also think that extent possible is shrinking. I really think that the mistake that's being made here by the Zionists is that what Jeffrey Sachs wants and what the Arab League has said is acceptable, a two-state solution based on pre-67 borders with capital in East Jerusalem of a Palestinian state. Okay, that would be the best way to save Israel. That would actually give them security, and they would make peace, and you could move to a whole new phase in that region. And I think you'd be surprised at what people can recover from if they would do it. And it could be done by the UN, as Jeffrey Sachs has suggested. And the ironic thing about all of this from the perspective of RFK is that he's not even advocating the policy that I think would be best for Israel with this. He's actually egging on or not confronting a really disastrous policy for Israel if they keep pursuing this. So that's the kicker. But I think it's that he understands that the consensus is not behind that in the U.S. deep state, perhaps the establishment, and then it's just simply not allowed. So what you might want to compare it to is JFK's position on the Cold War, which was bullshit, didn't need to exist at all. But when he ran as president, he did not confront that. It was an unassailable orthodoxy in the establishment, and he couldn't change it as a candidate. He tried to change it as a president, and that got him killed.
Yeah, but you can make an argument that for JFK almost had an excuse, right? It was much harder to gather the information to challenge it in a meaningful way as a candidate at that time. RFK has already proved you can't get Russia, Ukraine right, and then get Israel, Palestine wrong, and you say, "Oh, I need to research." Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. Let me check out some of these super chats. Warren West, reviewing TYT is like shooting fish in a barrel. Whew, that is the truth. Anthony Levinson, thank you for the super chat. Warren West, all U.S. calls are recorded by Israel. Amdocs. I can easily see that. I mean, hell, all the coverage for Gaza is
they record everything that anybody says anywhere. The national security state of the U.S. and they probably work with Israel too, and Britain as well. That's their thing.
Yeah, it's over. My issue, beyond. First of all, if RFK Jr. fumbles his bag, we're not going to have. I don't know when the next time that the U.S. is going to have another opportunity like this, because I think we've talked about this on your show. Where the job of the president, you can't really make change with the pen. If you're a good president, your Congress is going to push back at every step of the way. The deep state, CIA, FBI, whoever, they're going to push back every step of the way. Your job is to expose them for doing so, right? That's basically your job. If you're going to be a figurehead, you got to do it right. And just being able to do that would, even though you don't really control anything, would be a massive victory for the public and for the U.S. And could even put pressure on some people and give some people the courage to start doing the same. However, RFK is fumbling the bag not just for himself, but for others that may want to try to enter this space as an independent, because he had all the momentum that we really hadn't seen for an independent in modern history. Despite being blackballed by the Democratic Party, despite his stance on the pandemic, which a lot of Democrats may not have agreed with at the time. A lot of independents may not have agreed with his stance during with the pandemic at the time. And yet he was able to overcome all of this just to hit the softest buzzsaw of a political issue. And when I say soft, a soft buzzsaw, I'm saying it should have never had this much of a negative impact on him, because anyone who considers himself an independent is actually looking at this issue independently, absent of foreign influence or deep state influence. It's a layup issue, effectively. And that man look like Air Budden out there. I don't know what you want to like. He looking like just Sean Bradley with knob knees.
Well, look, think of it. He's looking to, as president at this particular time period, confront the deep state in terminal decline in terms of it being an empire. He's got to accommodate this regime, which is really a deep state regime. It's not a democracy so much. We have some democratic institutions like the presidency, which have considerable power, but it's corporate power determines who gets anywhere near the presidency in the first place. So that's automatically a huge constraining factor. On top of that, you have the intelligence agencies who get to decide the power of life and death in many ways. I mean, they are also they oversee the government and security of the government. They execute people. I have an article coming out soon about how they killed a CIA scientist back in the 50s, right? Because he was deemed a security risk. So they have the power of life and death. Presumably, if you look at JFK, you could think that they may have killed him using that kind of a mechanism. So you have this regime that we live under, which is not a democracy. He has to try to accommodate very dark forces that are very, very powerful. And if you look at what is happening in Israel and what they're able to get away with in front of the whole world, and that they're making the U.S. really punch itself repeatedly in the balls in terms of it's damaging its foreign policy. Metaphorically, I mean, it's just the most ridiculous thing. They're just owning themselves, damaging their image to the whole world. But that's the power that Zionism has in this regime. And this is a deadly regime, the regime that killed his father and his uncle. So it's something that you have to accommodate. And even if he is unable to do this and he fails in this way and we're going to complain about it, it's not as simple as say the right thing and do the right thing because it's so obvious what the right thing is. It is obvious what the right thing is, but it's also obvious that we live in a very scary, despotic regime. Now, the good news is, perhaps, or the cause for hope is that whatever happens with this election, and we know that we're not able to influence politics very much as anti-imperialists, the U.S. empire is nevertheless losing. So we may not be able to defeat them domestically in politics, but they seem to have no way to reverse their fortunes internationally. And I think that is.
But then at that point, what's the point of JFK doing what he's doing? That would be my argument. Like, okay, so if we're declining as an empire anyway, Israel is really declining in their power and influence in a lot of ways, to the point where even mainstream journalists are beginning to challenge their narratives out loud, which we probably haven't seen in like ever. And this is going to potentially result in a loss for RFK Jr. because the issue is not disappearing, right? That's because if it isn't, even if it isn't involving, for example, Gaza, it will involve Iran, and RFK hasn't been the best on that issue either, and probably because of Israel's involvement. So at that point, like, I'm genuinely curious, like, why? What are you gaining? If you're not gonna win because of this issue, this issue might stop you from winning. You can't challenge Israel despite the fact that they're responsible for all of the problems in the world, at least foreign policy wise. And you also know that the U.S. is declining anyway. So it's like, what is the point of any of this if that is like the mentality?
I think that the best thing for the U.S. establishment and really for even the Israeli Zionist establishment would be to let RFK be elected, to have RFK Jr. in the White House, because the problems of institutional corruption in the United States are so vast and so deep-seated that if you do not address them with more or less what he has called for in terms of reforming the bureaucracy and reapplying the rule of law in different ways, having truth and reconciliation for some state crimes, to really revamp American democracy, and have a process of just overhauling this and transitioning to a system that's lawful instead of lawless, because that's really what being a global empire has meant. It means we've been breaking the law all the time. That's what rules-based liberal international order means. So the sensible thing would be for Israel to adopt like a Jeffrey Sachs policy on Palestine, for the U.S. to do that, really, to use the UN Security Council to force a Palestinian state, to force Israel to accept a Palestinian state, and clear everyone out of all the settlers out of the West Bank. And that could be a painful process, but I think that the Middle Eastern countries would be ready to recognize Israel because they've said that they would, and a Palestinian state and rebuilding it could be the signature project of a new world, a new way of handling international affairs that accords to international law. And that's really what he's calling for in foreign policy in general. It's just this Israel thing is totally incompatible with it. But I feel in a sense he's got to have, in this regime, he has to somehow have the mandate of heaven from a critical mass of the establishment, and Israel seems to be itself alone or able to control that, or has a veto power in some way, at least, because nobody stands up to them. I don't think Israel runs everything and owns everything. I just think that this intertwining of the U.S. empire and Zionism has created this very terrible relationship, and it's been fueled by a kind of insane religious messianic philosophy. I don't know how else to say it. And it's but it's run its course.
Yeah, you can't really call it religious though, right? Because like the Torah doesn't even say what they are claiming it does. They're actually using like a biblical reference about Israel, like about the greater Israel. It's not even in the Torah, which is kind of ironic. But and I mean, beyond that, even Netanyahu, for example, he's secular. That's what kills me about the shit.
I don't know. I mean, when he starts whatever he says, he seems to believe in some crazy magical things that I don't believe in. So I wouldn't even call him that. When he says like Judea and Samaria, it's
but it's because he knows that the route of Zion is up. He doesn't actually believe any of that shit. He doesn't believe any of that. He just knows that the route of Zion is up. Well, I want to end on a lighter note though. So, man, what do you think about this JFK, RFK, Marilyn Monroe conspiracy?
Yeah, my understanding of this is that it's overblown, and that when you get down to it, the evidence is not very strong.
Yeah, it's not fun.
I think that JFK himself was a womanizer. He enjoyed the company of lots of women. So
he was.
Some of his most serious defenders will try to minimize that or deny that. I don't know why. But
people deny that JFK was a womanizer.
Some of his staunchest defenders will want to deny as much as they possibly can. I'm not really that interested in it because
MLK was on the up and up too, man. MLK, him and JFK were going to church together. They kept their hands to themselves.
Charismatic men in positions of power, history shows that they don't seem to be monogamous very often, and make of that what you will. So if we want to be adults about this, we can just sort of understand it. But I think that some of the things that have come out about him, like the Marilyn Monroe stuff, there are many things that I think are kind of character assassination of JFK, and it's kind of become its own little industry. Like Seymour Hersh, he got $1 million to basically write a book slamming JFK after all this movie came out.
Oh,
and he bought
hurts.
a house with it. He bought a house with it, man.
Oh, that kind of hurts. So, man. I really like Seymour Hersh.
I'm ambivalent about him, but it is what it is. You have any success there, even you're a guy like him with that kind of reputation. Most of his stories come from people on the inside who have an agenda to leak whatever they leak to him. So he's that's just kind of how he is. There's no reason to really get too worked up about him as a person. It's just that's the kind of system we have. But he shouldn't have written that book. I don't really
attribute anything that he does, like any of that type of stuff. Like with MLK, I don't really consider somebody's personal life like indicative of who they were as a person, like the change that they brought. Because like you can say that about most men and women in history. When you got a lot on your plate, man, you look for relief however you can look for it. I don't really try to judge. That's between him and his wife and his people. Coretta Scott King knew about everything that MLK was doing. She actually came out and attacked the people who were trying to slander MLK because of that. But I actually did not know about the JFK connection with Marilyn Monroe because of JFK. I found out about it because of the connection with her and Fidel Castro.
Is it Marilyn Monroe and Fidel Castro?
Yeah. So allegedly, no, not allegedly. She definitely was flying back and forth to Cuba. That was a fact. But the connection, this is the theory, is that at the same time she was messing with JFK and RFK, I believe at the time too, she was actually in a relationship to some degree with Fidel Castro. And that wasn't apparently the only celebrity that Fidel had messed with, because Fidel was a good looking guy and also extremely powerful. And so what the allegation was is that she had to be suicided basically, because there was a possibility that there could have been some trade secrets that were given to Fidel because she had messed with JFK. That's how I found out about it. I actually didn't even know about JFK.
The suicide thing, I tend to believe that she did commit suicide, because if I remember correctly, the autopsy was done by Thomas Noguchi. Thomas Noguchi is a famous coroner, and he is a guy of extreme integrity, because he was the coroner in 1968 when RFK, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, was assassinated. And he called up the top forensic pathologist in the country, Cyril Wecht, who had been a critic of the Warren Commission, the handling of the JFK forensic evidence. And he said, how should I do this? And he said, get in there, do an autopsy, do everything by the book, and leave nothing to the imagination. Like, go in there and do the best autopsy you can. And he did for the RFK case. And that autopsy today, because we have that, it basically alone proves, it proves that it exonerates Sirhan as the assassin combined with witness testimony, because he was shot at an upward angle from the right, from behind, a gun drawn like it was behind him, like the security guy behind him. It seems to be that's what happened, because fired right up at point blank range because of the powder burns, and that's all in the autopsy. And Sirhan was like 3 to 6 feet away from him, and firing directly at him, or firing at eye level or whatever, like firing like at a person. So that alone to me says that Noguchi wouldn't have lied about Marilyn Monroe. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's like, I think that autopsy, he says that it was
reliable journalist in the world wrote a smear book about JFK. I'm a Seymour Hersh super fan. I didn't even know about that. That's so sad. So,
well, Oliver, he says that if you read his memoir, Oliver Stone he says that Oliver accused him of being CIA. He goes, everybody told me you're CIA. So a lot of people have thought that, like Doug Valentine will talk about him as being a CIA asset. Man. So,
which is weird, because like Seymour Hersh has actually done a very good job of exposing CIA propaganda.
He has at times, but it's like, but they do that sometimes. So they need, his sources are CIA. Like he had what he did on work. It's not. I'm not saying he doesn't do anything that's good. It's just these guys have sources, and they use their sources, and their sources use them. It was cool that he exposed the fact that the CIA had somebody at the CIA go and look about Frank Olson and how they assassinated him in 1953. The guy I was talking about earlier. So that's a cool thing. It's good that he broke the story of the My Lai massacre, Abu Ghraib. He had a role in promoting that. I think people dispute whether he broke all these stories himself, but I think it's good that he did that. It's good he did the Nord Stream stuff. But at times, he's an opportunist, and somebody offers you $1 million, and he has that mindset. I think too. There's a certain kind of left liberal person that like thinks the Kennedy really needs to believe the Kennedys were just as bad as every other politician of the era.
Ah, got you. Let me check out some of these super chats. We're gonna get you up out of here. Warren West, Jack Ruby's original name was Jack Rubenstein. Did not know that.
He was Jewish, and he did say things. I mean, he wasn't like as I know it, like really devout Jewish person extremely. I mean, he ran a nightclub, prostitution racket, and dealt with drugs and other things. But he did say, I mean, he made statements after he was in jail that, oh, they're going to kill all the Jews if this happens. If I didn't do what I did, horrible things would happen to my people. I mean, it was he said if you took me back to Washington. Shit? Yeah, well, yeah. No, they did have an MK Ultra doctor visit him. That's in the book Chaos. So the guy Jolyon West came, the same guy who killed an elephant by dosing it with too much LSD. He visited Jack Ruby to check on him, and then he said, "Oh no, he's insane. You can't have him stand trial." But then Jack Ruby was saying things later like, "Oh, powerful." Crazy. He was saying, "Powerful people put me in this position, and I need to have a new trial." And he was awarded a new trial, and he said, "They're poisoning me. They're poisoning me with cancer." And then he dies. He dies of cancer not that long, or a pulmonary embolism, but also he had cancer. So it's a weird and sordid thing.
What? What? No, man. See, boy, anytime you bring up a Kennedy, some crazy shit come up, man. Warren said how we win. Read The Secrets of the Federal Reserve. Lord, baby Jesus. That's a whole rabbit hole in and of itself. Hey, if y'all want to really, and Aaron, I'll tell you to do some more research in this too. If y'all really want to ruffle up your feathers and really question everything that you know about even the early 20s, go look for the name of the bank that was destroyed in Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And also look at the time frame when the national budget was established. And also you won't find the name for the name of that bank, by the way, because apparently it never existed. They were just stuffing their money, their vast amounts of wealth in the shoebox. They didn't bomb the homes, by the way. They only bombed the business district. And also there was a bunch of Black Wall Streets that got bombed too around the same time that the national budget was established. So that's a fucking rabbit hole that every time I go down, I actually have to do I'm like, oh, hell no, I can't. It's too much today. Because you just find out, like, even in that Tulsa, Oklahoma situation where they say, oh, it was a race war. And then you're like, hold up, then why the hell did the National Guard get caught up and they start bombing from the sky? That doesn't make any sense. And you find out that shit probably wasn't really a race war. It just was like, this would be a very good excuse to bomb the hell out of them. And then about 6 months later, if I'm not mistaken, the national budget was established and the Fed was put in Tulsa. Yeah, it's crazy, yo. All that stuff is definitely connected. And at the end of the day, if you stand up to the establishment, if you stand up to power, if you stand up to the Fed, if you stand up to CIA, Aaron always does a good job of talking about the fact that, like, until we actually are willing to wrestle with, like, or even better yet, reconcile with the sins of this nation and the establishment, then, like, we're not really going to ever be able to move forward. The fact that we have to have this JFK conversation like it's like super secretive and like, oh man, I don't know if we should be touching this. Like, why the fuck not? Why should we not be? This thing that everyone knows is true. That's what's crazy. Like, be careful. Don't say the government assassinated JFK. It's like, except for all those documents that clearly prove that the government was involved in it. We know that they assassinated MLK. We know that they assassinated Fred Hampton. I mean, the list really does go on. We know that, especially during that time, they weren't above assassinating people. But the fact that we as a nation are unwilling to challenge that and be like, what the fuck? Well, if y'all did that, what we are protecting and how far y'all willing to go to protect your interests in the future? Like, that lets us know that unfortunately we're kind of running in quicksand. The only way we'll be able to pull ourselves out is if we get yanked out by circumstances like what we're seeing today with Russia and China and the multipolar world and BRICS kind of stepping up and doing it for us. So, yo, we're in some strange times, man. Aaron, where can everybody find you at?
I run the American Exception podcast on Patreon, so people can subscribe there. I'm doing currently a oral history series with Peter Dale Scott, and that's been really amazing. We're talking about very fascinating things here related to 9/11 and the Russian 9/11, which was a pretext for a war in Chechnya. Which is just fascinating. Peter is really one of the most brilliant people who's ever really written about these things, and he's 95 years old and still very smart, very brilliant. And so that's been a joy to do that. So people can follow me there. We're also on YouTube, the American Exception channel on YouTube, where I do the Devil's Chess Club with David Talbot and Bryce Green. We put about one of those out a week, and those often are available for free. I post them at fourdiedtrying.com. People should follow Four Died Trying and watch their documentary films that they're putting out, a series of them, and they're eventually going to cover the 4 assassinations of the 60s. So it's a good look at what happened to this country. So I'm doing work in that vein and writing at the Kennedy Beacon and doing the Kennedy Beacon podcast. And I stay very busy these days, and it's going to be an exciting year. Like you, I'm really hoping that Bobby will take the right position at the right time and find a way to do this, because if he doesn't, we're going to end up with another Democrat, Republican. And I worry about that for the next 4 years. I think that we really, really need to reorient the direction of the U.S. and the world. And he's as weird as it is and as slim as the chance may be. He's the only person of the 3 that has a remote clue about the major changes we need to do about the U.S. empire and the corruption of our own society. But he's afraid to touch Israel. And I can sort of see why if you look at what Israel's willing to do. But I think this is something he's on the historical stage here, and he's got to do the right thing. And I'm hoping it happens. And it's cool that even if working for the Kennedy Beacon, they wouldn't want me to write about that there, but they believe in the campaign itself believes in like free speech, and the people around the campaign, the people supporting it, they believe in free speech and their own principles enough to, allow people to speak about it. So I think that is something important to consider as well. And it's been cool to talk to you. So thanks for having me on.
No, of course, man. I appreciate you coming on, Aaron. Like I said, guys, he's a wealth of knowledge. Go follow American Exceptionalism. Go follow the Devil's Chess Club. David Taub is also damn genius himself. Y'all go follow Aaron on Twitter. Aaron's on Twitter too. What's your Twitter handle?
Aaron_good_.
How did you manage to steal that?
Got it in I think 2009 maybe is when I signed up.
Man, that's right whenever Twitter was basically made. Okay, that makes sense. All right, people. Other than that, thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream episode of For the People podcast. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you share this video. Leave a comment below. Y'all can support the show by becoming a patron on Patreon, becoming a premium subscriber on Rockfin. Obviously doing super chats and tips on super chats here, tips on Rockfin, or just sharing. That helps out a lot as well. But other than that, ladies and gentlemen, always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.